For those of you who work in offices collaborating with your colleagues on projects, this project is for you. But if you're a sole practitioner, there's goodies in this one to be found as well. Now, this is kind of building on the stuff that we covered in the intro course. Now, when you first get started with a project in Revit, the file is single user only. So only one person can work at a time on a file. Now, if you remember from the intro course, we talked about the central file, which will sit on your server, and the local file, which individuals use when they're wanting to work on the project. So again, let's just go through the process of sharing a project in Revit. So if you want to grab your notes. So here I've got a project ready to go. We've seen this project before when we were talking about view management last week. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable sharing on this file so that multiple people can work on it at the same time. So all of this stuff is done on the Collaborate tab. And the first step in sharing your project with your team is hitting the Collaborate button. Now, the next choice determines whether this file is going to be shared across your own network or shared across using Autodesk's A360 or their cloud services, which is not cheap. Henry said it's like $180 per month per person or something like that. It's quite a lot of money. So here you can either choose using the cloud or within your network. We're going to focus on the collaborating within your network. So hit OK. And what happens is over the next few seconds, Revit turns this from a single user file into a multi-user file. So you can see the progress bar down on the bottom there. And as soon as that's done, we will be creating what's called the central file. So after this process is done, if I'm already opening this on my server at my office, I would just save it straight away. And this would be now the central file that other users would access. So looking at the notes, number one, open your project and click the Collaborate button on the Collaborate tab. Now don't do this with your term project, because then you'll be turning your term project into a multi-user file, which you don't want to do. So please don't do this with your term project. You can open up a blank file and give that a go. Or in fact, you can open up this file from our Session 10 folder for tonight, RAC Advanced Sample Project 2018. Copy that to your desktop and open that. That's what I did here. I'm opening it from my computer and going through the process of taking a single user file and turning it into a multi-user file. So we've gone through step one. We've hit the Collaborate button. We've chosen to collaborate over our local network. Now step two says create user-created worksets for 3D objects for your project. Now, once you've enabled work sharing on a file, you're going to be in this dialog here a fair amount. It's called Worksets. So you can see it up here, Worksets. Worksets are kind of the only thing that you have to manage in Revit. It takes a little bit of organization on your part. The best metaphor that I can use for a workset is that it is like a layer in AutoCAD. So any of the 3D objects that you see in your screen will live in a workset. So for example, if I put my cursor on this grid here, you can see it is stored in you can see the tooltip on my cursor, shared levels and grids. And if I click to select it, it will show you what workset it resides in, shared levels and grids. And if I click on one of these walls in the view here, it says that it lives in a workset, which should be in the list here. There it is, down at the bottom. So I've clicked on a wall, and it's telling me that the workset is called Workset 1. So what are these worksets? Well, let's go back to the Collaborate tab and look at the Worksets dialog box. Now at the bottom you can see 4 check boxes that you can turn on or off to show the different kinds of work sets that Revit creates. Now the only one that you need to worry about is this one right here, user created. All of the other ones are handled by Revit automatically. Now, if you need a metaphor for what a work set is, think of it as like a bucket of data. Your user created work sets store the 3D geometry of your project. So everything from your site to your stairs to your furniture, if it's a 3D object, Revit stores that data inside one of these so-called user created work sets. They're called user created because if you don't make them, they're not going to be there. So when you first create a shared project, Revit makes these 2 work sets and it puts all the levels and grids into one and everything else into this work set 1 that you can, of course, rename. If you create a new view, Revit creates a new view work set. So what's a view work set compared to a user work set? Well, a view work set stores all the information and 2D geometry for a certain view. So this 3D view here, whichever one it is, or if I were to go down and find a floor plan work set, what's stored in that little bucket of data? All the text, all the dimensions, and all of the settings for that view. So when you create a new view in Revit, Revit automatically creates a view work set for it. And into that work set will go all your text and all your dimensions and any 2D lines or 2D geometry that you draw. Those get stored in the view work set. So you never have to worry about those view work sets at all. So you can see here I'm checking and unchecking the boxes for these different kinds of work sets. Now each time you load a door or a window or a title block or a grid bubble, Revit stores those in their own work set as well. So you've got all these little buckets that Revit is storing data into. There are work sets for all your different kinds of dimension styles and for arrowhead styles. So these are just parts of the database where Revit is storing this information. But as I said, the only one you need to deal with is user created. And this is where all of your 3D geometry goes. So what will happen is you make work sets for the exterior of your building, the interior of your building, and structure and site. So let's do it. I'm going to take work set 1 and I'm going to rename it. I call it building exterior. So work set 1 is being renamed to building exterior. So this means now that even all of my interior walls are being stored in this work set called building exterior. Well, no problem. I'm going to create a new work set called building interior. So there's that one. And now I'm going to create one more called structure. So you're going to have shared levels and grids, building exterior, building interior, and structure. Now, once you've created those work sets, go ahead and hit OK. What I want you to notice at the bottom of your drawing area is that now you can set a work set to be current. So that means now that any 3D geometry that I add to my projects subsequently, it will be put into the building interior work set. So if I go and grab a wall, and I put that wall here, if I come back and click on this wall, I can see that its work set is indeed building interior. So just like in AutoCAD where you can move a line to a different layer, you can move an object in Revit to a different work set. So here, maybe I want this on my exterior work set. No problem. Select it, find its work set parameter, and switch it to a different work set. So that's really easy. Now that Worksets have been added to a project, you're going to have an extra tab in your visibility dialog box. So here when I type in VV on my keyboard, you can see now I have a Worksets dialog. So until you enable work sharing in your project, you do not have this tab. As soon as you hit that collaborate button, Revit now adds this tab to all of the views of your model. So what does this mean? This means that I can take a whole work set and hide it in any given view. Now you'll notice that these have this global setting here. What does that mean? Well, if we go back and look at the Worksets dialog box, there's a checkbox, visible in all views. So this means I can create a work set that will automatically be hidden now from all views. If I uncheck this box, any geometry that's in the building interior work set would now be hidden. Let's prove it. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab this interior wall, and you could pick any interior wall, and I'm going to move it from the building exterior work set to the building interior work set, and you can see now it's hidden. It's still there, but now let's just step back and collaborate and work sets. We said that building interior is not visible in all views by default. Now when we look at our visibility dialog box, building interior is use global setting, not visible. So now I can actually force this work set to be shown all the time. So even though the global setting is for the interior work set to be turned off, I am forcing it to be shown. And there it is, it's back. So what's the purpose of this? Anybody here work in an office where architects and interior designers are working side by each on the same project? Anybody? No? Okay, so I've worked in a few offices where that's the case. In a lot of larger firms, interior design and architectural services will both be provided to a client for their project. So that way all that design is happening under the one roof, and the idea being that it'll be a more highly coordinated effort, which isn't always the case, right? But anyway, if interior design and architecture are happening in the same model, what this means is the architects can be working on the shell and putting in the partitions and doors, and the interior designers can be working on floor finish plans and getting the millwork straightened out. So what we can do is we can add a work set. So let's call it ID finishes. So it's interior design. So these are my floor finishes. So here I will label it as such. And I'm going to uncheck visible in all views so that here my interior design floors will not appear. So if we're doing something like a floor finish plan, what we would do is we just model a thin layer for our carpets, resilient flooring, carpet tile, whatever. Whatever floor finishes are going on top of our structural floor, the interior designers will make a bunch of floors that are just one layer, the finish, and they will put that finished floor on top of the architectural or structural floor. And what this means is that in the architectural views, those interior design floor finishes will not appear unless in these views we make a point of turning on the interior designer's floors. So this means in all the architectural views of the project there won't be any interior design stuff showing up unless it's wanted. So what will happen is the interior designers will create their own views, so they will duplicate views and add in the floors in those views. So the interior designers will have their own separate set of floor plans separate from everybody else. So as you can see, you can set a work set current, start drawing with that work set current, all geometry that is added while that work set is current will get that workset as part of its, that's what workset the object will reside in, unless we later select the object and then move it into the workset that we want. So that's the long and short of it. Now the process of creating the central file, all the steps are listed in the first page of the notes, so I'm not going to go over those because you guys can read that and understand it easily enough. The important thing, once you've sort of created the worksets for the project and you've got it saved to your network server, just before you get out of the file, step 4 on page 1, use the synchronize and modify settings dialog to relinquish worksets so that the team can access those objects. So if you're the person who's making this central file for your team, before you close out of the file so that your team can now access it and start working, you must do this. Oh, I've got to save the file. Okay, so I will put this, there we go, and so. So here you'll notice I'm saving my file, and if I go into options, you'll see here Revit is saying this is for sure going to be the central model. So after you enable worksets, the first save that you do after you've enabled worksets creates the central file. Now I think I'll put it on my desktop. Alright, so this isn't a good place for a network server, but I don't have any networks I can connect to right now, so I'll just put it on my desktop. So this will be the central file. So you save the file, step 3, and now step 4, we're going to use sync and modify settings so that we can kind of open up the doors for everybody to jump in and start working. So here we go. Synchronize and modify settings. So this is step 4. So in this dialog box, you make sure that you've checked user created workset, so that's step 4 in our notes, and this gets you out of the file because you created all those worksets, so you have exclusive control over them until you go through this process. Now as soon as I hit OK here, I'm done, and I can close the file, and now it's ready to go. So when people come to start work on this project, they go to the open dialog box, and really maybe circle this. Do not let your staff just go on the network using Windows Explorer and go and navigate to the central file and just, double click and open it. They can't do that. It won't work right. And the reason is, you must go through the open dialog box in Revit. And here's why. Because when you click on that file now, look at this. It creates the local file. So for this whole work sharing thing in Revit to work properly, people need to open the central file using the Revit open dialog box, because then it makes the local file. Now let me just switch the lights around here. Go. Because when you're using this whole shared file business, so on your server, you've got the little project here, your tower. Your central file is on the server, but nobody ever opens it directly. What happens is when people go through the open dialog box in Revit, and it copies this to your workstation, an exact copy. And so what it'll do is, it's called a project, .rbt. It just adds your username to the end. That's the local file. So on the server, you have the central file. On your workstation, you have the local file. And that's what you work on to do work on the project. And so when you want to save your changes to the team, you synchronize with Central. So that's that dialog box we talked about a few moments ago, sync with Central. And when you do that, you update the central file with all the stuff that you've done, and Revit updates you with all the stuff that other people have done. So, you know, if you've got 600 people who are working alongside with you in the project, they are all saving to Central on a regular basis. The way that Revit prevents conflicts from happening is that while you're working on this local file, Revit is staying in constant contact with the local file. Now this is just happening in the background. You don't see anything, but you start touching objects and moving around. Revit is in milliseconds talking to the central database and letting it know who has what signed out. Now every object in Revit, every 2D object, every 3D object in Revit has a unique number in Revit's database.
So it means when we are working on a Revit project that is on the office, everybody knows that who's working on it?
Yes,
And
I mean you
change.
yeah, you have a team of people that know what's going on, and between you coordinate your efforts, like who's doing what. So somebody might say, hey, you know what, I'm going to be doing the furniture plan. Somebody else might be saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to be tagging the doors and getting the right door hardware added to the doors and to the door schedule. Somebody else might be working on the interior elevations. Somebody else might be working on getting the rooms finished. Somebody else might be working on the building envelope. Somebody else might be working on the structure. So usually you break up those tasks to different people on the team so that you're not stepping on each other's toes. So what happens is the instant somebody starts working with, say, this wall here, and they just start moving it, well, this wall has a number in Revit's database. And on the Manage tab, if you click IDs of selection, there's a little number here, 144180. Now, who cares about the number? The number doesn't matter. The point is that the moment I grab this wall and I try to move it, or put a door into it, or change what kind of a wall assembly this is, that very millisecond, when I do that, Revit sends a note to the central file right away, and it says that Wes has that object signed out. The very next millisecond after I touch that wall, nobody else in the office would be able to do so. It's first come, first serve. So I grab that wall, I move it, that's it. Nobody else is touching it. Piece of text in a view. I grab it first, I got it. You can have 6 people working in the same view, but only one person gets to work on any one 2D or 3D object. And Revit is sending these quick blasts of information, just checking in with the central file to coordinate who has what signed out. As you add new objects in, of course people can't see those yet, so if you're adding new information, you do a save to central, that's great, but they still aren't seeing it yet. They don't see real-time updates of the changes that you're making or the stuff that you're adding. So what happens is, when you do a save to central, you see at the same time changes from other users. So if you make a bunch of changes and you add a bunch of stuff, nobody else in the office is going to see it until they do a save to central on their end. So here, somebody working on their own file would have to do their own save to central after you have done save to central, or synchronize with central. Same idea. They only get the updates once they do a save to central after you. Now, save to central doesn't take that long, provided you haven't made any changes. So if you're saving every 10 minutes, it'll take at most 20 seconds for a save to central to happen. And sometimes it's not even 5. It's just boom, it's really quick. Because Revit only coordinates things that have changed. Now if you've got like 5 people working like gangbusters on a file, your saves can take a little bit longer because there's more changes to push back and forth across the network. But if you have a big honkin' project, and it's quite common to see a central file that's 500 megs, so literally half a gig, so all your local files will be the same size. But Revit will only synchronize over the network the portions that have changed. So there's only been, 500 kilobytes, which is 1/millionth of a project. If it's just 500 kilobytes of changes that have been written, just some text that's been added and a few basic features, that the save is almost instantaneous. So what people are doing then is they're saving to central when they're wanting to update the team. If you want to just save your work locally, you guys know about the little antiquated 3.5-inch disk icon, which no millennial has ever seen. You hit that, and of course, you are just saving. That's just Control S. A good old save command. You're saving to your local file. And, do that every 10 or 15 minutes, right? Not that Revit crashes often. I can count on one hand the number of times I can get Revit to crash in a year. It's pretty hard to get Revit to crash. On bigger jobs, you can make it happen. But usually that's just because you've run out of memory. And that would only happen on the super, super big jobs. So you're saving the central, you're saving locally. That's the way this whole thing works. And that's how conflict is prevented by your computer talking to the central file and coordinating everything through the central file on the server.
You mentioned, for example, when I'm working in one subject, for example, the door, nobody else can work on the door.
That's correct.
So until I release the door.
That's right.
So the only thing that I can release the door is save.
That's correct. So the question is, or the inquiry is, so if there's a door that I'm working on here, and whatever change I've made to it here, how can I give control of that to another person? Well, the only way you can do that is by saving to central. And when you do that, any objects that you sign out will be relinquished. So that means to give up control. So you relinquish control of the objects that you've added and the objects that you've edited or modified. And that's what borrowed elements means. So borrowed element is an object that you have modified, not necessarily created, but it could be a created object. You're giving control of that back up to the team. So as soon as you save to central, people are free to grab those objects and work on them freely. So looking in the bottom of page 1, you can see there's workset owners and workset borrowers. So an owner of a workset is someone who has control over that entire workset. Now, in the bad old days of Revit, when worksets first came out, each one of these user-created worksets can only be accessed by one person. So how many, what do I got there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 5 different worksets. So it meant that no more than 5 people could work on the job at a time. Because what happened is you came in, you signed out a workset, it was yours, and you were the only person who could work on that workset. So this is a little bit of a legacy thing in terms of what worksets were originally meant to do. Now, the honest truth is you don't need to create any worksets to collaborate in Revit. You don't. We create worksets for reasons that we're going to talk about tonight. But in terms of collaboration, you don't need to make worksets for collaboration. Just those 2 that Revit makes at the beginning are good enough. Because you can sign out an object, this object, that object, away you go, work on it, save to central, the team gets it back. So, from that perspective, it's no big deal. And if you've just grabbed an object or 2, you're considered a borrower. Now, how do I become an owner? See here, I'm listed as a borrower in the Worksets dialog box. See, I'm a borrower. That's good. How do I become an owner? You want to do this sparingly. So here, if I click on a workset and make it editable, watch what happens in the owners column. I become an owner. And as soon as I hit OK, nobody else in the office is going to be able to work on that workset. Revit will say, hey, if there's any object that's in the building exterior workset, Boom, you're all locked out now. So the only way you would be able to get control of those objects, or to edit any of them, is if I go back to the Save to Central dialog box and see, here, relinquish control of that work set back to the team. So now when I go back to Worksets, you'll see that my name is no longer listed there as an owner. So my name is gone. So really what you want to do is stay as a borrower and not an owner. So down to page 2, we've kind of talked about what the current workset is and creating worksets. Page 3, we've kind of talked about working with worksets. The one thing I didn't mention is reload latest. So once you have your local file created, like I have here, you've got your save icon, which you'll see up in the quick access toolbar, or I can go to File and then choose Save. So there's the mystery icon, the mystery millennial icon, the 3.5-inch plastic disc. So that saves locally. And then here, this is saving to my central file. Now you notice there's 2 buttons here. They both do the same thing, but the one that says Synchronize and Modify Settings just gives a confirmation dialog box with regards to what it is that you are giving back to the team. So it would automatically check borrowed elements for you. The only difference between Synchronize and Modify Settings and Synchronize Now is if you have owned a work set. So in Worksets, we showed how I could pick a work set and become an owner by making it editable. You can also do that on a per view basis. So if I right click on a view and I make that work set editable, from that point forward, nobody on the team would be able to edit any annotation in this view or change any setting of the view. So as soon as I do that, boom, I have exclusive control of this plan view. Other people could look at it, other people could add new stuff to it, which I can't see yet. So other users might be adding more dimensions, but I wouldn't be able to see them. But any of the existing 2-dimensional geometry here, or changing the scale, or changing any other settings of that view, you won't be able to do it because I made it editable. Now, if I go to Synchronize to Central and choose Sync and Modify Settings, see how it's going to relinquish the view work sets? It'll do that automatically. It'll give that view back to the team. But user-created work sets? No. When you make a user-created work set editable by you, so I'm talking about a user-created work set here, if I make a work set editable, Revit does not automatically give that work set back up to the team unless you specifically go into the settings, Sync and Modify Settings dialog box, and check the box. Now other users, if they've been away from their desk for a few minutes, haven't been working, they just want to get an update on what's going on in the central file, they can click Reload Latest, and in that case you're just pulling new information down from the central file. Now, halfway down page 3 on the right hand side, it shows you a little dialog box here. It's called Editing Request Received. Now this is when you've been working on an object and then somebody else in your office tries to modify it too. So you got somebody else in your office who wants to edit the same object that you've just been working on. And you can choose Show, Grant, or Deny. So if you wanted to give someone control of an object, you can hit Grant, but you'll probably have to save to Central because you probably have changed it and you need to do a Save to Central so that your colleague can see the modified version of that object. So quite often you can't really hit Grant. You need to Save to Central, which would release control. The other person needs to Reload Latest so they can get the modified version of the object, and away you go. So that's been discussed in the notes. Page 3. Typical kinds of work sets. These are the kinds of work sets that I will usually add to a project when I'm working on it with other users. And the explanations are all in the notes. Let's take a break for 10 minutes and then we'll come back and go on to page 4 and talk about what we use Worksets for. We kind of talked about it a little bit, but we'll get into that in more detail. So let's come back at 1:45.